Marcus Chun had seen many strange things during his 3 years working on Station Nexus 7. The massive trading hub orbited the neutral zone between human space and the Galactic Commerce Union. Every day brought new alien species, bizarre technologies, and customs that made no sense to human minds. But nothing had prepared him for what he witnessed in the station's public facilities that Tuesday morning. The young human engineer was heading to the maintenance bay when nature called. The public restrooms on Level 12 served all species, with specialized facilities for different biological needs. Marcus entered the human section, but as he washed his hands, he heard an odd crystalline sound coming from the adjacent Zephyrian section. Zephyrians were one of the newer species to join the galactic community. They looked remarkably similar to humans, bipedal, roughly the same height, with delicate features and pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the right light. Their females, in particular, were considered quite beautiful by human standards, though such thoughts were generally kept private due to diplomatic protocols. The crystalline sound grew louder, almost like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Marcus frowned, wondering if there was a malfunction in the alien plumbing systems. As the station's lead maintenance engineer, it was his responsibility to ensure all facilities functioned properly. He couldn't ignore potential problems, even in sections designed for other species. He knocked gently on the partition wall. "Excuse me, is everything all right in there? I'm station maintenance." A soft, melodic voice responded in accented standard galactic. "Oh, yes, everything is normal. Please, do not worry." Marcus recognized the voice. It belonged to Lyra, a young Zephyrian who worked in the station's Botanical Research Center. She had arrived 6 months ago as part of a cultural exchange program. Unlike many aliens who found humans crude or primitive, Lyra had always been friendly during their brief encounters in the corridors. She would smile and nod politely, sometimes even attempting small talk about the station's various plant specimens. "Are you sure?" Marcus called back. "That sound isn't normal for any plumbing system I know." There was a long pause, followed by more crystalline chiming. Then, Lyra's voice came again, sounding embarrassed. There is no malfunction. This is how my people relieve ourselves." Marcus blinked in confusion. He had studied alien biology as part of his engineering certification, but Zephyrian physiology wasn't well documented in human databases. Most of what humans knew came from basic diplomatic exchanges and trade negotiations. "Oh," he said, feeling awkward. "I'm sorry for bothering you. I just wanted to make sure the facilities were working properly." "They are," Lyra replied quickly. "Thank you for your concern." Marcus was about to leave when he heard her gasp. The crystalline sounds had stopped abruptly, replaced by what sounded like something small and hard hitting the floor repeatedly. "Is everything okay?" he asked again, genuinely worried now. Another pause. Then, very quietly, I have a problem." "What kind of problem?" The collection chamber. It is not working, and I cannot leave this here." Marcus frowned. Collection chamber? He wasn't familiar with that term in relation to any station facilities. "Can I help somehow? I'm an engineer. If there's a mechanical issue." No, Lyra said quickly. It would not be appropriate. And you would not understand." The crystalline sounds resumed, faster now, almost frantic. Marcus could hear Lyra making soft sounds of distress. His engineering instincts kicked in. Whatever was happening, she clearly needed assistance, and he wasn't going to walk away from someone in trouble. "Lyra," he said firmly, "I'm a professional engineer. I've dealt with waste management systems for dozens of different species. Whatever the problem is, I can probably help solve it. And I promise I'll be completely professional about it." There was a very long silence. Finally, Lyra spoke in a small voice. You know my name?" "Of course I do. You work in the Botanical Center on Level 8. You're studying the compatibility between Earth plants and Zephyrian soil samples." Another pause. Then, "The problem is not mechanical. It is biological and cultural. And if anyone discovers this, I will be in very serious trouble." Marcus leaned against the wall, his curiosity now fully engaged. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind where I lose my research position and get sent home in disgrace." That sounded serious. Marcus had seen enough interspecies incidents to know that cultural misunderstandings could escalate quickly in the galactic community. "Okay, let's start simple. What exactly is malfunctioning? Not malfunctioning. Broken. The collection unit attached to this facility is broken, and I cannot collect what I have produced. Collect what you've produced? Marcus tried to process this. Lyra, I'm not following. What exactly do Zephyrians produce when they use the facilities? The silence stretched so long that Marcus wondered if she had somehow left without him hearing. Finally, her voice came back, barely above a whisper. Crystals. Marcus blinked. I'm sorry, what? Crystals, she repeated, sounding mortified. My people, when we eliminate waste from our bodies, we produce crystalline formations. They are valuable. Very valuable. The engineer's mind raced. Crystals? Valuable crystals? He thought about the crystalline sounds he had been hearing. You mean you literally? Yes, Lyra said quickly. And now they are scattered across the floor of this facility, and the collection chamber that is supposed to gather them is broken, and I cannot leave them here because they are worth more than most humans make in a year. But I also cannot collect them myself because that would be deeply shameful according to my culture, and I cannot call for official help because then everyone will know that I used inferior station facilities instead of the proper Zephyrian waste management systems on my ship, which means I broke cultural protocol, which means she was speaking faster and faster, clearly on the verge of panic. Marcus held up his hands, even though she couldn't see him. Okay, let's slow down. You're saying that when Zephyrians use the bathroom, they produce valuable crystals? Yes. And these crystals are scattered on the floor because the collection system is broken? Yes. And you can't pick them up yourself because of cultural reasons? It would be like a human eating their own. She made a disgusted sound. It is considered deeply shameful and disgusting. Marcus nodded slowly, beginning to understand. Many species had complex cultural taboos around waste elimination. Some considered any contact with waste products to be spiritually contaminating. Others had elaborate purification rituals. He had encountered several such customs during his time on the station. But the crystals themselves aren't considered waste? He asked. No, they are precious. They are used for energy storage, medical applications, technological components. One small crystal can power a starship's communication array for months. A handful can buy a house. Marcus whistled softly. That was valuable indeed. And right now they're just lying on the floor? Yes, Lyra said miserably. And I do not know what to do. The engineer considered the situation. A young alien was in distress. There were apparently extremely valuable materials scattered in a public facility, and cultural protocols prevented her from dealing with the situation herself. As a station employee, he had a responsibility to help resolve problems. As a human being, he couldn't walk away from someone who needed assistance. All right, he said. I'm going to help you. You cannot, Lyra protested. You do not understand the implications. Then, explain them to me. Another long pause. Then, Lyra began speaking in a rush. If anyone discovers that I use station facilities instead of my ship's proper waste management system, it will be reported to the Zephyrian Cultural Council. They will consider it a violation of our dignity protocols. I will lose my research position, my cultural exchange status, and my family will be shamed. But I cannot touch the crystals myself without violating even deeper cultural taboos. And if I leave them here, they will be discovered by maintenance crews, which will lead to the same problems, plus potential theft charges because they are so valuable. Marcus absorbed this information. Okay, so you need someone else to collect the crystals without anyone official finding out about it. Yes, but why would you help me? You barely know me, and this could cause problems for you too if it is discovered. That was a good question. Marcus thought about it for a moment. Why was he willing to get involved in this bizarre situation? Maybe it was his engineering instinct to solve problems. Maybe it was simple human decency. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Because you need help, he said simply. And because I think you're a good person who made an honest mistake. There was a long silence from the other side of the wall. When Lyra spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. You would really do this for me? Yes, but I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with. Can you describe these crystals? They are small mostly, clear with a blue tint. They look like... She paused, searching for the right words in standard galactic. Like frozen pieces of sky. Very beautiful. They catch light and reflect it in patterns. Marcus nodded. How many are we talking about? Perhaps 20 or 30 small ones. And maybe 3 or 4 larger ones. And they're just lying on the floor? Yes. Some have rolled under the waste elimination unit. I can hear them moving when the air circulation system runs. Marcus looked around the human section of the facilities, noting the layout. The alien sections were similar, but adapted for different physiologies. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to get a maintenance kit from my equipment locker. I'll announce that I'm performing routine inspection of the alien facilities. That will give me legitimate access and explain why I'm there. But what about the crystals? I'll collect them as part of my inspection. Then, I'll return them to you privately. No one else has to know what really happened. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. You would lie to your supervisors for me? It's not lying exactly. I am performing a maintenance inspection. I'm just not mentioning all the details in my report. But if you are caught, I won't be caught. I'm good at my job, and I know how these systems work. Trust me. Another pause. Then, Marcus. Yes. Why are you being so kind to me? It was a simple question, but it caught him off guard. He thought about his interactions with Lyra over the past 6 months. She had always been polite, friendly even. In a station full of aliens who viewed humans as either curiosities or inferior beings, she had treated him as an equal. She asked thoughtful questions about his work, showed genuine interest in human perspectives on botanical research, and never displayed the casual condescension he encountered from other species. Because you've always been kind to me, he said honestly. There was a soft sound that might have been crying. Thank you, Lyra whispered. Don't thank me yet. Let me go get my equipment first. Can you wait here for a few more minutes? Yes, I will wait. Marcus left the facilities and headed for his equipment locker on level 10. His mind was spinning as he walked. Crystals that formed naturally in alien biology and were worth a fortune. It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, but then, again, his entire life had become science fiction the moment humanity made contact with the galactic community. He grabbed a standard maintenance kit and added a few extra tools that might be useful for collecting small objects from tight spaces. As he rode the elevator back to level 12, he found himself wondering what these crystals actually looked like. Lyra's description had been poetic, but vague. When he returned to the facilities, he could hear Lyra moving around in the Zephyrian section, apparently trying to retrieve crystals that had rolled out of reach. I'm back, he announced. I'm going to start my official inspection now. Okay, came her muffled reply. Marcus activated his maintenance scanner and began documenting his inspection of the human facilities first, establishing a legitimate paper trail. Then, he moved to the Zephyrian section. The door was still closed with Lyra inside. Maintenance inspection, he called out, following standard protocol. Do you need a few more minutes? No, I am. I am finished. But I cannot exit until I've resolved the collection system malfunction. Marcus finished smoothly. Understood. Please step back from the door. Marcus opened the Zephyrian facility and immediately understood why Lyra had been so distressed. The space looked like someone had scattered a handful of perfect gemstones across the floor. The crystals caught the artificial lighting and threw back brilliant blue sparkles that danced on the walls. They were absolutely beautiful. And they were everywhere. Oh wow, he breathed. You can see why this is a problem, Lyra said quietly. She was pressed against the far wall, her pale blue skin flushed darker with embarrassment. Marcus knelt down and carefully picked up one of the larger crystals. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with its own internal light. The weight felt substantial, and the crystal was perfectly formed, as if it had been cut by a master jeweler. These are incredible, he said honestly. I've never seen anything like them. They are normal for my people, Lyra replied, though she sounded pleased by his reaction. Every Zephyrian produces them. It is just biology. Marcus began carefully collecting the scattered crystals, placing them in a specialized container from his maintenance kit. Some had indeed rolled under the waste elimination unit, requiring him to use extendable tools to retrieve them. Each crystal was unique in size and shape, but all shared the same incredible beauty and internal luminescence. How often does this happen? He asked as he worked. The production? Once or twice per day, depending on diet and health. Marcus paused in his collection efforts. You produce crystals like these twice a day? Is that unusual? Lyra, if these are worth what you said they are, your people must be incredibly wealthy. She was quiet for a moment. Wealth is complicated in our society. The crystals are valuable, yes, but they are also essential for our technology and medicine. We do not simply sell them to the highest bidder. But you could if you wanted to. Theoretically, yes. But it would be like selling your blood or organs. Technically possible, but culturally unacceptable. Marcus nodded, beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. He finished collecting the visible crystals and ran his scanner over the area to make sure he hadn't missed any. Got them all, he announced, sealing the container. 37 crystals total. That seems correct, Lyra said with relief. Now, about this collection system malfunction. Marcus examined the small device mounted on the wall. It appeared to be a specialized version of standard waste management technology, adapted for crystalline materials rather than organic waste. The problem was immediately obvious, a simple component failure that would take about 5 minutes to fix. Found the issue, he said, pulling out his tools. Crystalline intake valve is stuck in the closed position. Probably needs cleaning and recalibration. As he worked on the repair, Lyra watched with interest. You understand our technology? Basic principles are the same across most species. Different materials, different applications, but the underlying engineering concepts are universal. He finished the repair and ran a diagnostic check. There we go. Good as new. Just like that. Just like that. Engineering is engineering, whether you're human, Zephyrian, or anything else. Lyra stared at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Well, the mechanical part anyway. The cultural and biological aspects are much more complicated. Marcus finished his inspection documentation and prepared to leave. He handed Lyra the container of crystals, being careful not to let their hands touch. Even though he was helping her, he didn't want to violate any cultural boundaries he wasn't aware of. Thank you, she said softly, accepting the container. I do not know how to repay this kindness. You don't need to repay anything. I was just doing my job. No, Lyra said firmly. You went far beyond your job. You risked your position to help me. And you treated me with dignity in a very embarrassing situation. That is not just doing your job. That is being a good person. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. It wasn't that big a deal. It was to me. They looked at each other for a moment, and Marcus felt something shift in their dynamic. Before, they had been casual acquaintances who exchanged pleasantries in the corridors. Now, there was a connection born of shared trust and mutual respect. I should go, Marcus said finally. I have other maintenance rounds to complete. Of course. But Marcus? Yes. If you ever need anything at all, please come find me. I owe you a debt that I will not forget. Marcus nodded and left the facilities, his mind churning with everything that had just happened. As he walked back to his equipment locker, he couldn't stop thinking about those beautiful crystals and the remarkable young woman who produced them. He had learned more about Zephyrian biology and culture in 20 minutes than in 6 months of casual interaction. But, more than that, he had seen genuine gratitude and kindness from someone who had every reason to be embarrassed and defensive. Lyra had trusted him with information that could ruin her career and her family's reputation. That wasn't something he would take lightly. As he filed his maintenance report, Marcus made a decision. He would learn more about Zephyrian culture. Not just the basic diplomatic information available in standard databases, but the real details that mattered for understanding people like Lyra. If he was going to be friends with someone from another species, he wanted to do it right. He also decided he would keep an eye on the Zephyrian facilities in this section of the station. Not because he expected more problems, but because he wanted to make sure Lyra never had to face such a crisis alone again. After all, what were friends for? 3 days after the incident in the facilities, Marcus was reviewing maintenance logs in his office when his communication panel chimed. The caller identification showed Lyra's name and station quarters address. Marcus. Her voice carried a note of uncertainty that immediately caught his attention. Hi, Lyra. Is everything all right? I need to ask you something. Could you come to my quarters? I have something to show you that I cannot discuss over the communication system. Marcus glanced at his schedule. He had been planning to recalibrate the atmospheric processors on level 15, but that could wait. Sure, I'll be there in 10 minutes. Lyra's quarters were in the residential section designated for visiting researchers and diplomats. The corridors here were quieter than the main commercial areas, with soft lighting and decorative elements meant to make long-term residents feel more at home. Marcus had never been to this part of the station before. When Lyra opened her door, Marcus was struck by how different she looked in her personal space. Gone was the formal research attire he was used to seeing. Instead, she wore what appeared to be casual Zephyrian clothing, flowing fabrics in shades of blue and silver that complemented her natural coloring. Her hair, usually bound up in a professional style, hung loose around her shoulders. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing him inside. The quarters were larger than standard station accommodations, reflecting the diplomatic importance of the cultural exchange program. But what caught Marcus's attention wasn't the size or layout. It was the incredible display of crystals arranged throughout the room. Dozens of crystalline formations sat on shelves, tables, and specialized display stands. They ranged in size from tiny gems no bigger than his fingernail to massive structures that could barely fit on their platforms. All glowed with the same internal light he had seen in the facilities, but here the effect was magnified 100-fold. The room sparkled like the inside of a geode. "This is amazing," Marcus said, turning slowly to take it all in. "These are my personal collection," Lyra explained. "In Zephyrian culture, we keep samples of our own crystalline production throughout our lives. It is considered both a medical record and a spiritual practice." Marcus moved closer to examine some of the displays. Each crystal was labeled with dates and symbols he couldn't read. "How long does this represent?" 23 years. Since I was old enough to produce stable formations." "You've been creating crystals like these since childhood?" "All Zephyrians do. But mine are." She paused, seeming to search for the right words. "They are somewhat unusual." Marcus looked at her curiously. "Unusual how?" Instead of answering directly, Lyra led him to a particular display case. Inside were 3 crystals that were noticeably different from the others. Where most of her collection showed the characteristic blue tint, these 3 were completely clear with what appeared to be tiny galaxies swirling inside them. "I have never shown these to anyone outside my family," Lyra said quietly. "Not even to other Zephyrians." Marcus leaned closer, fascinated. The internal structures of these crystals seemed to move and shift as he watched. "What makes them special?" "They contain quantum resonance patterns that should not be possible in naturally formed biological crystals. According to our science, they should not exist. But they do exist." "Yes, and if the Zephyrian Science Council knew about them, they would want to study them." "Which would mean studying me." "Which would mean—" She shrugged helplessly. Marcus was beginning to understand. "You'd become a laboratory subject instead of a researcher." "Exactly. My family sent me here hoping that distance from our homeworld would give me space to develop my own career before anyone discovered my anomaly." "Is that why you're studying botanical research instead of crystalline science?" Lyra looked surprised. "You notice that my research focus seems unrelated to my species' primary expertise?" "I notice a lot of things. It's part of being an engineer." Marcus continued studying the unusual crystals. "These are incredible. Have you ever tried to understand how they form?" "I have done some private research, but Zephyrian medical equipment is designed for standard crystalline analysis. These formations require different approaches." Marcus turned to face her fully. "Is that why you asked me here? You want help studying them?" Lyra's skin flushed slightly darker. "Yes and no. I do want help, but not just with research. I want to understand why you helped me 3 days ago." "I told you why. You said it was because I needed help and because you thought I was a good person. But many humans would not have taken such a risk for an alien they barely knew." Marcus considered this. She was right, of course. Most humans on the station maintained professional, but distant relationships with other species. The cultural and biological differences were often too complex to navigate casually. "I suppose I'm not like most humans." "No," Lyra agreed. "You are not. And that is what I want to understand." She moved to another section of her display, where several dozen smaller crystals were arranged in precise geometric patterns. "These were produced over the past month, since I arrived at this station and began interacting with humans regularly." Marcus studied the arrangement. The crystals in this section showed subtle variations he hadn't noticed before, slight differences in clarity, internal structure, and the way they reflected light. They're different from your older ones. Yes, Zephyrian crystalline production is influenced by emotional and psychological states. Major life events, stress, joy, fear, they all affect the formation process. Marcus looked at her with growing understanding. Your crystals have been changing since you came here. Since I began working alongside humans, yes. But, more specifically, she moved to the most recent section of the display. Since I began interacting with you, the crystals here were unlike anything Marcus had seen in the rest of her collection. They maintained the basic Zephyrian characteristics, but showed swirling patterns of gold and silver threaded through the blue matrix. They seemed to pulse with warmth rather than the cool light of the others. I have never produced anything like these before, Lyra said softly. And, according to our medical literature, such formations should not be possible. Marcus stared at the crystals, trying to process what he was being told. You're saying that interacting with me has changed your biological processes? It appears so. How is that possible? I do not know. That is what I hope to discover. Marcus moved away from the displays, needing space to think. This was far beyond anything he had expected when he agreed to help collect scattered crystals. Lyra, if these changes are really related to our interactions, shouldn't you be discussing this with medical professionals? Or at least other Zephyrians? And tell them what? That a human has somehow influenced my crystalline production in ways that contradict our understanding of biology? That would lead to exactly the kind of scrutiny I came here to avoid. But if it's medically significant, is it medically significant? Or is it something else entirely? Lyra turned to face him directly. Marcus, in human culture, when someone's biology changes in response to interaction with another person, what does that typically indicate? The question hung in the air between them. Marcus felt his understanding shift as the implications became clear. Are you saying? I am saying that I do not understand what is happening to me. But I know it began when I started spending time around you. And I know that these crystals are unlike anything in Zephyrian medical records. Marcus sat down heavily in one of her chairs, his engineer's mind racing through possibilities. This could be a simple biochemical response to a new environment. Exposure to different atmospheric compositions, gravitational variations, dietary changes. I have been tested for all environmental factors. My medical readings are normal except for the crystalline anomalies. Then, maybe it's psychological. Stress from working in an alien environment, excitement about new research opportunities. Perhaps. But, Marcus, look at these crystals. Really look at them. He stood up and approached the most recent display again. The golden threads seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat, and the silver swirls moved in patterns that reminded him of neural pathways firing. They're beautiful, he said honestly. They are unprecedented, Lyra corrected. And they only began forming after our first real conversation in the botanical lab 6 weeks ago. Marcus remembered that conversation. Lyra had been struggling with a compatibility analysis between Earth wheat and Zephyrian soil samples. He had stopped by to check on the atmospheric controls and ended up helping her solve a calculation error. They had talked for almost an hour about the differences between human and Zephyrian agricultural techniques. That was just professional collaboration. Was it? Lyra moved closer to him. Because I have collaborated with dozens of researchers from multiple species, and none of those interactions changed my biology. Marcus looked at her, really looked, and saw something in her expression that made his chest tight. What are you trying to tell me? I am trying to tell you that I think my body is responding to emotional states I have never experienced before. Emotions that apparently do not exist in normal Zephyrian psychology. What kind of emotions? Lyra's skin flushed darker, and she looked down at her hands. Attraction, affection, what humans might call. She paused, struggling with the words. What you might call romantic feelings. The silence stretched between them. Marcus felt like the station's gravity had suddenly doubled. Lyra, I know this is impossible, she said quickly. I know that interspecies relationships are complicated and often prohibited. I know that my biology and yours are incompatible in most ways. But I cannot deny what is happening to my crystalline production. Marcus moved to the nearest chair and sat down again. You're telling me that your body is literally producing evidence of romantic feelings? It appears so. And this has never happened before with any other Zephyrian? No. Our reproduction and pair bonding processes are very different from human ones. We do not experience what you call romantic love. But you're experiencing it now? I think so. I do not have another explanation for these formations. She gestured at the golden-threaded crystals. Unless human biology somehow influences Zephyrian crystalline production in ways that our scientists have never discovered. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the onset of a headache. This is insane. Yes. If you're right, it could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies biology. Yes. And if you're wrong, we're both probably violating about a dozen diplomatic protocols just by having this conversation. Yes. Marcus looked up at her. So what do you want to do about it? Lyra sat down across from him, her movements graceful despite her obvious nervousness. I want to understand what is happening. I want to study these formations and determine if they represent a genuine biochemical response to emotional states, or if there is some other explanation. That's the scientist in you talking. What does the rest of you want? She was quiet for a long moment. The rest of me wants to explore these feelings, regardless of the scientific implications. But I do not know if that is wise or even possible. Marcus studied her face, noting the genuine uncertainty there. Lyra, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Of course. Are you telling me this because you want to understand the science, or because you want to know if I have feelings for you too? Her skin flushed so dark it was almost purple. Both, she whispered. Marcus felt something settle in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Good. Because I was starting to worry that I was the only one confused by whatever this is. Lyra's head snapped up, her eyes wide. You have feelings for me? I've been trying not to think about it for weeks. You're brilliant, kind, funny, and he gestured helplessly. And you're an alien. I assumed anything I might be feeling was inappropriate and impossible. But you do feel something? Marcus looked around the room at her crystal collection, physical evidence of a life, and biology he could barely comprehend. Then, he looked back at her face, which despite its alien features had become remarkably familiar and dear to him. Yes, he said simply. I do. They sat in silence for several minutes, the reality of their mutual admission settling between them. Finally, Lyra spoke. What do we do now? I don't know, Marcus replied honestly. I've never been in this situation before. Nor have I. And the scientific implications are important, Marcus finished. But they're not the most important thing right now. What is the most important thing? Marcus stood up and moved closer to her display of recent crystals. The golden threads seemed to pulse brighter as he approached. The most important thing is figuring out if this is real, and if it is, whether we want to pursue it despite all the complications. How do we determine if it is real? Marcus turned back to her with a small smile. We do what any good scientist would do. We test our hypothesis. And how do we test a hypothesis about interspecies romantic attraction? Carefully, Marcus said. Very, very carefully. Lyra stood up and moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could see the subtle shimmer of her skin in the crystal light. I would like to try, but I do not want to hurt you, and I do not want to damage our friendship if we are wrong about this. We won't know unless we try. And if we try and it does not work? Marcus considered this. Then, we'll know, and we can go back to being friends. But if we don't try, we'll always wonder. Lyra nodded slowly. There is wisdom in that approach. They stood together in comfortable silence, surrounded by the evidence of her impossible biology and the growing reality of their impossible feelings. Whatever came next, Marcus knew that his life on the station would never be the same. Can I ask you something? He said. Anything. When you first realized your crystals were changing, were you scared? Lyra considered the question. Terrified. I thought I was developing some kind of medical condition that would end my research career. And now? She looked at him with an expression that was unmistakably fond. Now I think I might be developing something wonderful instead. Marcus felt warmth spread through his chest. Whatever the science behind it, whatever the cultural complications, whatever the diplomatic implications, he was beginning to think she might be right. As if responding to their emotional states, the crystals around them pulsed with gentle light, filling the room with warmth and beauty. It was like being inside a living gemstone, surrounded by the physical evidence of something neither of their species had thought possible. "So," Marcus said quietly, "where do we start?" 2 weeks into their careful exploration of whatever was developing between them, Marcus discovered that dating an alien presented challenges he had never considered. The most immediate problem was that they had no cultural framework for what they were doing. Human dating rituals were meaningless to Lyra, and Zephyrian bonding practices were completely incomprehensible to Marcus. They found themselves inventing their own approach, built on conversations, shared meals, and long walks through the station's observation decks. But the real complexity came from Lyra's crystalline production, which had become an ongoing scientific mystery that fascinated and occasionally frustrated them both. "Look at this morning's formation," Lyra said, showing Marcus a crystal she had collected earlier. They were in her quarters again, which had become their preferred meeting place. The privacy allowed them to speak freely about subjects that would cause problems if overheard by other station residents. Marcus accepted the crystal carefully. It was larger than her usual productions, with internal structures that seemed to shift and flow like liquid gold. "It's beautiful, but different from yesterday's. Yesterday we had dinner together in the public dining area. Last night we talked about human literature for 3 hours. This morning you brought me coffee and a data pad with new botanical research from Earth. You think the crystal formation is responding to specific interactions? I am certain of it. But I cannot predict what will produce what kind of formation." Lyra moved to her growing collection of recent crystals, each one cataloged with detailed notes about her emotional and physical state at the time of production. "These 5 were all produced after conversations with you, but they are completely different from each other." Marcus studied the crystals she indicated. She was right. While they all shared the golden threading that seemed to characterize her post-Marcus formations, their internal structures, sizes, and optical properties varied significantly. "Maybe it's not just about interacting with me," he suggested. "Maybe it's about different types of emotional responses." "That is what I think as well. But Zephyrian emotional categories do not seem to apply to what I am experiencing." This had become a recurring theme in their discussions. Zephyrian psychology, as Lyra explained it, was much more straightforward than human emotional complexity. They experienced contentment, frustration, curiosity, fear, and satisfaction, but not the intricate web of feelings that humans took for granted. "Describe what you were feeling when you produced that one," Marcus said, pointing to a particularly striking crystal with silver spirals wound through the gold matrix. Lyra's skin darkened with what he had learned was embarrassment. "You will think it is foolish." "I won't. I promise. I was anticipating seeing you that day. You had promised to show me how the station's hydroponic systems worked, and I found myself excited about learning something new from you. But, more than that, I was excited about spending time with you specifically." Marcus nodded. "That doesn't sound foolish at all. Humans call that anticipation mixed with affection. We have words for anticipation. We do not have words for the other feeling. What does it feel like when you experience it?" Lyra moved closer to him, her expression thoughtful. "Like warmth spreading outward from my chest. Like time moving too slowly until I see you. And then, too quickly when we are together. Like wanting to tell you things I have never told anyone else." Marcus felt his own chest tighten in recognition. "That sounds like what humans experience when we're falling in love." "Falling in love," Lyra repeated slowly, testing the unfamiliar phrase. "What a strange way to describe it. As if love is a place one can fall into." "I think that's actually pretty accurate. It doesn't feel like a choice most of the time. It feels like something that happens to you." "Yes, that is exactly how this feels. Like something happening to me, not something I am deciding." They stood together in comfortable silence, processing this shared understanding. Marcus had been grappling with his own feelings for weeks, trying to determine how much was genuine attraction and how much was simply fascination with the impossible situation they found themselves in. "Marcus," Lyra said quietly, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Have you ever been in love before? With a human?" Marcus considered how to answer honestly. "I thought I was a few times. But, looking back, I think those were more like strong attractions or deep friendships. Nothing that felt like this." "What is different about this?" "Everything. Marcus moved to look out her viewport at the stars beyond the station. With humans, romantic feelings usually develop gradually. You meet someone, you find them attractive, you get to know them better, you discover compatibility, and eventually you might fall in love. It's a process. And with me? With you? It's like all of those steps happen simultaneously. I saw you as attractive, intelligent, and kind right from the beginning. But I also felt this immediate recognition. Like my brain said yes, this person before I even understood what that meant. Lyra joined him at the viewport. I experienced something similar. From our first real conversation, I felt drawn to you in ways I had never experienced. But I assumed it was simply intellectual stimulation. When did you realize it was more than that? When I started producing the unusual crystals. Physical evidence that my body was responding to emotional states I did not recognize. She paused. When did you realize your feelings were romantic? Marcus laughed softly. When I found myself volunteering to work extra shifts just to have excuses to visit the botanical lab. When I started paying attention to what time you usually ate dinner so I could accidentally be in the dining area at the same time. When I realized I was memorizing your work schedule. You memorized my work schedule? Down to your 15-minute break times. Lyra's skin flushed, but she was smiling. That is very human behavior. Very human male behavior when we're interested in someone. I did something similar. I began timing my visits to the station's common areas to coincide with your maintenance rounds. I told myself I was simply interested in human engineering techniques. And were you? I was interested in watching you work. The way you approach problems, the confidence you show when handling complex systems, the patience you demonstrate when explaining things to others. She looked at him directly. I found it all very attractive. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. I had no idea you were paying such close attention. I was trying to be subtle. You were. I never suspected. They stood together watching the stars, both lost in thought about the strange path that had brought them to this moment. Finally, Marcus spoke. Lyra, I need to tell you something. What is it? This is probably the most complicated relationship I'll ever have. Different species, different biology, different cultures, potential diplomatic implications. He turned to face her. And I don't care about any of that. You do not. I care about you. I care about whether you're happy, whether you're safe, whether your research is going well. I care about spending time with you and learning more about how your mind works. Everything else feels secondary. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. Even the fact that I am not human, especially that, I do not understand. Marcus moved closer to her, close enough to see the subtle patterns in her skin that seemed to shift with her emotional state. Lyra, you're brilliant, kind, funny, and absolutely fascinating. You think in ways that challenge my assumptions about everything. You see the universe from perspectives I could never imagine on my own. The fact that you're not human doesn't make you less appealing. It makes you more interesting. But surely it creates practical difficulties. Everything worthwhile creates practical difficulties. The question is whether the person is worth working through them. And you think I am worth it? I know you are. Lyra's expression was soft and wondering. How can you be so certain? Because I've never met anyone who makes me want to be a better person just by being around them. Because talking with you is the best part of every day. Because when I imagine my future now, you're in it. Tears formed in Lyra's eyes, apparently a response shared by their species. Marcus, I need to tell you something as well. What is it? Yesterday, I received a communication from my family on Zephyr Prime. They are concerned about the length of my stay here and want me to return home soon. Marcus felt his stomach drop. How soon? They have not given me a specific deadline, but they are growing impatient with what they see as my failure to complete my research objectives. What are your research objectives? Officially? To study the compatibility of Earth plant species with Zephyrian agricultural techniques. Unofficially? To stay away from home long enough for my crystalline anomalies to stabilize into something normal. Marcus processed this information. And if you go back before they stabilize, I will likely become a permanent research subject for the Science Council. My family sent me here to avoid that fate, but they cannot protect me indefinitely. How much time do we have? Perhaps a month. Maybe 2 if I can present compelling research progress. A month to figure out if their impossible relationship had any kind of future. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest, followed quickly by determination. Then, We need to make some decisions, he said. What kind of decisions? About what we want, what we're willing to risk, and what we're going to do about the fact that we're falling in love across a gap of evolutionary impossibility. Lyra reached out and took his hand, a gesture they had discovered worked despite the differences in their physiology. Her skin was warm and had a texture like silk. I know what I want, she said quietly. What do you want? I want to stay here with you. I want to continue learning about human perspectives and sharing Zephyrian knowledge. I want to wake up each morning knowing I will see you that day. I want to solve problems together and discover new things together and I want to find out what these crystals mean, not just scientifically, but emotionally. I want to understand what my body is trying to tell me about what I feel for you. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. That's exactly what I want too. But wanting something and being able to have it are different things. Sometimes. But sometimes impossible things become possible if you're willing to work for them. Lyra looked at him with an expression that was pure hope. You think our situation could work? Really? I think we owe it to ourselves to find out. And I think we're both intelligent enough to solve whatever problems we encounter. Even the problem of your people and my people having no framework for interspecies relationships. Especially that problem. Someone has to be first, right? Lyra smiled, and Marcus was struck again by how beautiful she was, not in spite of her alien features, but because of them. The way her skin shifted color with her emotions, the graceful structure of her face, the intelligence that shone from her eyes. You make it sound simple, she said. The feelings are simple. Everything else is just logistics. As if summoned by their emotional state, the crystals around them began to pulse with gentle light. The most recent formations glowed brightest, their golden threads seeming to reach toward each other across the display cases. Look, Lyra whispered, pointing at the phenomena. What's happening? I do not know. They have never done this before. The light grew stronger, and Marcus could swear he felt warmth radiating from the crystals. It was beautiful and strange and somehow deeply right. Whatever's happening, he said softly. I think your body is trying to tell us something. What do you think it is saying? Marcus looked at her, surrounded by the impossible evidence of their impossible feelings, and smiled. I think it's saying yes. The crisis came 3 weeks later in the form of an unannounced visit from Dr. Zuravel Thorne, Senior Cultural Attaché for the Zephyrian Science Council. Marcus was in the middle of routine maintenance on Level 8 when his communication panel erupted with urgent messages from station security. All department heads to Conference Room Alpha immediately, announced Captain Morrison, the station commander. We have a diplomatic situation requiring immediate attention. Marcus felt his blood turn cold. Lyra had mentioned that morning that she had received another communication from her family, this one more urgent than previous messages. The timing of Dr. Velthorne's arrival couldn't be a coincidence. He made his way to Conference Room Alpha, where he found the station's senior staff already assembled. Captain Morrison stood at the head of the table, her expression grim. Beside her sat a tall Zephyrian woman with silver-streaked skin and an air of absolute authority. This is Dr. Velthorne from the Zephyrian Science Council, Morrison announced. She's here on urgent official business regarding one of our research exchange participants. Dr. Velthorne stood, her movements precise and controlled. I am here to retrieve research specialist Lyra Keth-San, who has exceeded her authorized stay and failed to report critical biological anomalies to the proper authorities. Marcus felt his heart stop. Critical biological anomalies. They knew about the crystals. Dr. Velthorne, said Commander Torres from the diplomatic department. We were under the impression that Lyra's research status was in good standing. Research specialist Keth-San's academic work is satisfactory, Dr. Velthorne replied coldly. However, she has concealed medical information that has implications for our understanding of Zephyrian biology. She must return to Zephyr Prime immediately for comprehensive evaluation. What kind of medical information? Asked Dr. Sarah Kim, the station's chief medical officer. Information that falls under Zephyrian medical privacy laws. I am not at liberty to discuss details with non-Zephyrian personnel. Captain Morrison leaned forward. Dr. Velthorne, while we respect Zephyrian sovereignty, Lyra is currently under our protection as a cultural exchange participant. We cannot simply hand her over without understanding the situation. You can and You will, Dr. Velthorn said firmly. She is a Zephyrian citizen who has violated cultural protocols and concealed medical information from her government. This is not a request. Marcus realized he had to speak up, regardless of the consequences. Captain Morrison, I request permission to speak. Morrison looked surprised. Your engineering staff, Chun. This is a diplomatic matter. With respect, ma'am, I have information relevant to this situation. Dr. Velthorn's attention focused on Marcus with laser intensity. You are the human who has been interacting with research specialist Keth-san. It wasn't a question. Marcus felt the weight of everyone's stares. Yes, I am. Then, you are aware of her biological anomalies. Marcus looked around the room at his colleagues and supervisors, people he had worked with for 3 years. Whatever he said next would change everything. Yes, I'm aware of them. Dr. Velthorn's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. And you have said nothing to your superiors about medical phenomena that could represent a significant scientific discovery. The phenomena in question are private medical information that Lyra shared with me in confidence. Lyra, Dr. Velthorn repeated, her voice sharp. You refer to research specialist Keth-san by her personal name? Marcus realized he had just confirmed whatever suspicions had brought her here. Yes, I do. The room erupted in murmured conversations as his colleagues processed this admission. Captain Morrison held up her hand for silence. Mr. Chun, are you telling us that you have personal relationship with our Zephyrian exchange researcher? Yes, ma'am. What kind of personal relationship? Marcus took a deep breath. A romantic one. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Velthorn's expression went from stern to horrified. Impossible, she breathed. Zephyrians do not form romantic attachments with alien species. We do not have the biological or psychological capacity for such responses. With respect, Doctor, Marcus said quietly, your information appears to be incomplete. Dr. Velthorn stared at him for a long moment. Then, she activated a communication device and spoke rapidly in Zephyrian. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but the tone was urgent and alarmed. I am ordering an immediate medical evacuation, she announced to the room. Research specialist Keth-san will be removed from this station within the hour. Now wait just a minute, Captain Morrison said, standing. You can't just. I can and I am. This situation represents a potential biological contamination event with implications for both our species. Biological contamination? Dr. Kim asked sharply. What exactly are you suggesting? I am suggesting that if a Zephyrian has somehow developed romantic responses to a human, the cause could be pathological. Viral infection, parasitic influence, chemical contamination, psychological manipulation. I haven't manipulated anyone, Marcus said angrily. Haven't you? Dr. Velthorn turned to face him fully. You admit to forming an inappropriate relationship with a vulnerable young female who was far from her home and family support systems. You concealed medical information that could represent a significant threat to her health and well-being. I fell in love with her. Marcus interrupted, his voice echoing in the conference room. And she fell in love with me. That's not contamination or manipulation. It's just what happened. Dr. Velthorn's face went pale. Love? You claim that research specialist Keth-san has developed the capacity for romantic love. I don't claim it. I know it. Because I've seen the evidence. What evidence? Marcus realized he was about to violate Lyra's privacy in the most comprehensive way possible. But, if he didn't speak up now, she would disappear from his life forever. Her crystalline production has changed. She's producing formations that are completely unlike anything in Zephyrian medical records. Formations that correlate directly with her emotional responses to our relationship. The room went dead silent. Dr. Velthorn sat down heavily. Show me, she whispered. I can't. They're in her private quarters, and I won't violate her privacy without her consent. Then, we will obtain her consent. Guards, escort research specialist Keth-san to this conference room immediately. Captain Morrison held up her hand. Dr. Velthorn, I understand your concern, but we're not going to force anyone to do anything. If Lyra wants to speak with you, that's her choice. If she wants to return to Zephyr Prime, that's also her choice. But we won't coerce her either way. She is not competent to make such decisions if she is suffering from biological contamination. Then, Let's ask our medical officer to evaluate her, Morrison said calmly. Dr. Kim, would you be willing to examine Lyra and determine if there's any evidence of the contamination Dr. Velthorn is worried about? Dr. Kim nodded. Of course, but I'll need Lyra's consent, and I'll need to understand what we're looking for. Dr. Velthorn was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with competing priorities. Finally, she spoke. Zephyrian crystalline production is controlled by complex biological processes that we have studied for centuries. The formations produced are influenced by health, diet, age, and basic emotional states. What you are describing, crystals that respond to romantic feelings, should not be possible. But they exist, Marcus said. If they exist, Dr. Velthorn corrected. And if they do, they represent either a completely unknown biological capability or evidence of serious medical pathology. At that moment, the conference room doors opened, and Lyra entered, flanked by 2 security officers. Marcus felt his heart clench at the expression on her face, fear, confusion, and hurt all mixed together. Marcus, she said, looking around the room. What is happening? Dr. Velthorn stood and spoke in Zephyrian. Lyra's face went pale as she listened, and she responded in the same language. The conversation grew heated, with Dr. Velthorn's voice becoming increasingly sharp. Finally, Lyra switched back to Standard Galactic. No, she said firmly. I will not submit to involuntary medical examination, and I will not return to Zephyr Prime until I have completed my research. Your research is irrelevant compared to the biological implications of what has been reported, Dr. Velthorn replied. What has been reported? Dr. Velthorn gestured at Marcus. This human claims that you have developed the capacity for romantic love, and that your crystalline production has been altered as a result. Lyra's eyes widened as she looked at Marcus. He could see hurt and betrayal in her expression. You told them? She whispered. I had to, Marcus said desperately. They were going to take you away. I couldn't let that happen without fighting for you. By violating my privacy and making me sound like a medical curiosity? By telling the truth about what we found together. Lyra was quiet for a long moment, looking around the room at all the faces staring at her. Marcus could see her making a decision. Dr. Velthorn, she said formally, I will agree to medical examination and consultation about my crystalline production. But I have conditions. You are not in a position to make conditions. I am if you want my cooperation instead of having to physically force me to comply. Dr. Velthorn considered this. What conditions? First, the examination will be conducted here on the station by both Zephyrian and human medical personnel. Second, Marcus will be present during all discussions about my condition. Third, any decisions about my future will be made by me, not by you or the Science Council. Impossible. This is a matter of planetary security. This is a matter of personal autonomy, Lyra shot back. And if you want to study my anomalous crystals, you'll need my cooperation to understand their formation patterns. Marcus felt a surge of pride at her fierce independence, even in this impossible situation. Dr. Velthorn was quiet for several minutes, clearly communicating with someone off-station via her communication device. Finally, she looked up. The Science Council has authorized a limited examination under your stated conditions. But understand that depending on what we discover, those conditions may change. Understood, Lyra said. But, for now, we proceed on my terms. She looked directly at Marcus, and he could see both fear and determination in her eyes. I suppose it's time for everyone to see what we've been hiding, she said quietly. Marcus nodded. Whatever came next, at least they would face it together. Dr. Kim, Captain Morrison said, please coordinate with Dr. Velthorn to set up appropriate medical facilities. This examination will be conducted according to station protocols and with full respect for Lyra's rights. Understood, Captain. As the meeting began to disperse, Marcus moved closer to Lyra. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I know this isn't how you wanted this to come out. No, she agreed. But perhaps it was always going to come out this way. We were trying to solve an impossible problem in secret. Maybe it's time for other people to help us understand what's happening. Are you afraid? Lyra looked around the room, where diplomats and scientists were already making plans for her examination. Terrified, she said honestly, but also relieved. I'm tired of hiding what we found together. Marcus reached out and took her hand, not caring who saw. Whatever they discover, whatever they decide, I want you to know that I don't regret any of this. Even if it ruins your career? Even if it ruins my career. Lyra squeezed his hand. Then, let's go show them what impossible looks like. The medical examination took place in the station's most advanced laboratory, with Dr. Kim working alongside Dr. Velthorn and 2 additional Zephyrian specialists who arrived within hours of the initial crisis. Marcus sat in the observation area, watching through reinforced glass as Lyra underwent tests that seemed both fascinating and invasive. The baseline readings are completely normal, Dr. Kim announced, reviewing data from multiple scanners. No evidence of viral infection, parasitic infiltration, or chemical contamination. Then, how do you explain these formations? Dr. Velthorn held up one of Lyra's recent crystals, which she had reluctantly provided from her personal collection. Dr. Kim studied the crystal through a specialized viewer. I've never seen anything like it. The internal structure is incredibly complex, and it seems to be generating its own electromagnetic field. That should not be possible, said Dr. Kempf, one of the Zephyrian specialists. Biological crystals do not produce electromagnetic fields. This one does, Dr. Kim replied. And, according to Lyra's documentation, the field strength correlates with her emotional state at the time of formation. Marcus watched Lyra through the glass. She sat calmly on the examination table, answering questions and submitting to scans, but he could see the tension in her posture. This was exactly the kind of scientific scrutiny she had been trying to avoid. Lyra, Dr. Velthorn said, consulting her notes. You have documented 47 anomalous crystal formations over the past 8 weeks. Can you describe the emotional states that preceded each formation? I have provided detailed notes with each sample, Lyra replied evenly. Yes, but your notes reference emotional categories that do not exist in Zephyrian psychology. Anticipation mixed with fondness. Contentment tinged with longing. Joy layered with uncertainty. These are not recognized emotional classifications. Perhaps that is because I am experiencing emotions that Zephyrians do not normally experience. Dr. Velthorn exchanged glances with her colleagues. Which brings us to the central question. Why are you experiencing emotions that should be impossible for your species? I do not know. But you believe it is related to your interaction with the human? Lyra looked through the observation window at Marcus. Yes, I do. How did these interactions begin? Professionally, Marcus helped me with technical issues related to my research. Over time, we began to have more personal conversations. And when did you first notice changes in your crystalline production? Approximately 6 weeks ago, after our first extended conversation outside of work requirements. Dr. Kempf leaned forward. Describe this conversation. Lyra was quiet for a moment. Marcus had stopped by the botanical lab to check atmospheric controls. I was struggling with a complex calculation. He offered to help, and we ended up discussing differences between human and Zephyrian agricultural techniques. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, and this single conversation triggered biological changes. The changes began after that conversation, yes. What made this conversation different from your professional interactions with other species? Marcus watched Lyra consider the question carefully. Marcus treated me as an intellectual equal. He listened to my ideas and offered thoughtful responses. He seemed genuinely interested in Zephyrian perspectives, not just politely tolerant. Many humans have shown professional interest in Zephyrian knowledge. Yes, but... Lyra paused, searching for words. Marcus was interested in my thoughts, not just my species' knowledge. He wanted to understand how I think, not just what I know. Dr. Velthorn made notes on her data pad. And you found this personally engaging? I found it stimulating in ways I had never experienced. Intellectually stimulating? Intellectually and emotionally stimulating. But Zephyrians do not experience emotional stimulation from intellectual discourse. I am, Lyra said simply. The examination continued for hours, with the medical team taking detailed scans of Lyra's latest crystal formations while she described the circumstances of their creation. Marcus found himself holding his breath as intimate details of their relationship became clinical data points. Finally, Dr. Kim called for a break. I need time to analyze these readings before we continue. The medical team withdrew to a smaller conference room, leaving Marcus alone with Lyra in the laboratory. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "It is strange to have our private moments become scientific specimens," she replied with a tired smile. "I'm sorry this is happening." "I am not. Not anymore." Lyra stood and moved to the window overlooking the station's main corridor. "Marcus, regardless of what they decide, I want you to know that these past few months have been the happiest of my life. Mine too. Even though they may end with me being classified as a medical anomaly." Marcus moved to stand beside her. "Especially because of that." "What do you mean?" "Lyra, you've done something that every scientist in the galaxy thought was impossible. You've developed emotional responses that shouldn't exist in your species. You've produced crystals that violate known laws of biology. You've proven that consciousness and emotion are more flexible and mysterious than anyone imagined. You make it sound like an accomplishment rather than a medical condition. That's because I think it is an accomplishment. You didn't just fall in love with me. You literally evolved the capacity for a new kind of emotion." Lyra stared at him. "I had not thought of it that way. Your feelings aren't a contamination or a malfunction. They're an adaptation, an expansion of what your species thought was possible." Before Lyra could respond, the medical team returned. Dr. Kim looked excited while Dr. Velthorn appeared deeply troubled. "We've completed our analysis of the crystal formations," Dr. Kim announced. "And the results are remarkable." "Explain," Dr. Velthorn said curtly. "The electromagnetic fields generated by these crystals appear to be quantum coherent. They're maintaining stable quantum states at room temperature, which should be impossible for biological materials." "What does that mean?" Marcus asked. "It means these crystals aren't just pretty rocks. They're functioning quantum computers." The room went silent. Dr. Velthorn sat down heavily. "Quantum computers?" she repeated. "The internal structures are processing information in ways we've never seen in biological systems. And the information appears to be emotional." "You're saying that Lyra's feelings are being encoded into quantum crystalline structures?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. These crystals are physical manifestations of emotional states that exist as quantum information." Dr. Kent spoke up. "Dr. Kim, are you suggesting that this individual has somehow developed the ability to create quantum computational structures through biological processes?" "I'm not suggesting it. The data proves it." Dr. Velthorn stood up and began pacing. "This is impossible. Biological quantum computation doesn't exist outside of theoretical papers." "It exists now," Dr. Kim replied firmly. "And it appears to have been triggered by interspecies emotional bonding." Marcus felt his understanding of the situation shift dramatically. "You're saying that Lyra and I falling in love somehow triggered the development of quantum biological computation?" "That appears to be exactly what happened." Lyra was staring at her own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. "I am creating quantum computers?" "You're creating quantum computers that encode emotional states," Dr. Kim corrected. "And they're stable, functional, and completely unprecedented in biological literature." Dr. Velthorn stopped pacing and faced Lyra directly. "Do you understand what this means?" "No," Lyra said quietly. "I do not. It means you haven't just developed impossible emotions. You've developed impossible biology. You're processing feelings through quantum mechanics. Is that good or bad?" Dr. Kim and Dr. Velthorn exchanged glances. Finally, Dr. Kim spoke. "It's revolutionary. These crystals could advance our understanding of consciousness, emotion, and quantum mechanics by centuries." But, Marcus prompted. "But, we don't understand how the process works or whether it's stable." Lyra could be in the early stages of a biological transformation that might not be survivable. The weight of this statement settled over the room. Marcus felt cold fear spreading through his chest. "What kind of transformation?" he asked. "We don't know. The quantum processing appears to be expanding beyond emotional encoding. Her latest crystals show evidence of processing other types of information as well." "What kind of information?" Dr. Kim pulled up holographic displays showing the internal structure of Lyra's most recent crystal. "Memory formation, sensory processing, predictive modeling. It's like her entire cognitive system is being restructured around quantum computation." "Into what?" Lyra asked, her voice very small. "We don't know. There's no precedent for this kind of biological quantum integration." Marcus moved closer to Lyra, taking her hand despite the medical monitoring equipment. Is she in danger? We don't know that either. The process could stabilize at its current level, it could continue expanding, or it could become unstable and reverse itself. Or, Marcus prompted, sensing there was more. Dr. Velthorn answered grimly. Or it could continue expanding until her entire biological system is restructured around quantum processes, at which point she would no longer be recognizably Zephyrian. What would she be? Unknown. Possibly.